Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. For over 20 years, he has been in our living rooms. He has a leading role on one of the most influential television programs in Canadian history. He's a beloved figure in comedy, known for his sharp wit and engaging storytelling, a skill he has used in his memoir, which became a national bestseller. The book offered a hilarious and heartfelt account of his journey from Newfoundland to the national stage by sharing behind-the-scenes stories from his career. It spawned an award-winning coming-of-age TV show based on his real-life experiences growing up in Newfoundland. As a child who is much older inside than his 11 years, he's become synonymous with Canadian comedy and knows what sets us apart in the Great White North.
So I've had the great opportunity to go all across the country and back again, meet all kinds of folks. I like the way we represent ourselves in the world. I like that we're a good ally. I like that we care about, things like identity and the environment and things like that. So no, I would not have, I could not pick a better country to be from.
I'm Craig Baird. This is Canadian History X Biography. Today I bring you a man whose comedy skews our past, present, and future, and without him, we would be a little less funny. This is Mark Critch. Before we begin, a fun fact. Technically speaking, Mark Critch is a first-generation Canadian.
It took a while, I think, for Newfoundlanders to feel Canadian because we hadn't been during the war. So 1949 wasn't that long ago. We were a different country with our own passport, with our own currency, our own stamps, our own anthem. And so Canada, of course, is also not a place you can drive to. It's across the ocean.
Feeling confused? Well, let me explain my favorite subject and why you're really here. History! Mike Critch, Mark's father, was born in Newfoundland in 1922. At the time, Newfoundland was a British dominion and included the island of Newfoundland and Labrador on the continental mainland. Newfoundland was one of the original dominions under the Balfour Declaration of 1926 and accordingly enjoyed a constitutional status equivalent to the other dominions of the time. As Mark said, they had their own prime minister, their own Newfoundland red ensign, which was the de facto national flag until they adopted the Union flag on May 15, 1931. They even had their own anthem.
When sun rays crown like pine-clad hills, and summer spreads her hand, when silvern voices tune thy rills, we love thee, smiling land. We love thee, we love thee, we love thee, smiling land.
Ode to Newfoundland was written by British Colonel Governor Sir Cavendish Boyle in 1902 and was adopted as the Dominion's anthem on May 20th, 1904. This is the world Mike Critch was born into and lived in for much of his early life. Then, during the Second World War, Mike worked on American bases and at one point even gave Frank Sinatra a tour of a base while Old Blue Eyes was there to perform. And after the war, Mike Critch became a newspaper journalist. In 1949, when Newfoundland joined Canada as the 10th province, he was there.
For my dad's generation, Dad was a bit of an older fella. He was born in the 20s. So for that generation, there are, especially in rural communities where they had been forced to resettle their communities after Confederation, etc., and kind of give up a way of life, there was a lot of families who the fathers didn't talk to the sons because one voted for or against Confederation. I had a different kind of experience in a way because my father was born a Newfoundlander. He wasn't born a Canadian. Dad actually, when Canada joined Newfoundland in 1949, Dad was actually one of the reporters who covered Confederation for the Daily News. So he sat there during the debates and reported on them.
Just over 10 years later, Mike Critch became a reporter on VOCM, the top radio station in the new province. And around this same time, he met a woman named Mary, and the two fell in love. The couple married and had a son, Mike, who soon followed. Then, 8 years later, another boy, which you know as Mark Critch. Mark wrote of his entry into the world in his award-winning memoir, Son of a Critch. I wouldn't say I was planned. Very few people space their kids 8 years apart. But we were Catholic. For many of us, we have an epiphany as children that draws us to what we want to do with our lives. Mark's destiny changed forever when he turned on the television and saw a show made in St. John's, his hometown. The Wonderful Grand Band began as a comedy group in 1978 and became a television show on CBC in 1980. In 4 seasons, it aired 40 episodes featuring music and sketches developed by Tommy Sexton and Greg Malone, and both men went on to develop the iconic Codco. You might remember some of this from my episode on This Hour Has 22 Minutes, which I released in January 2024. That Codco was born in 1973 when Tommy Sexton and comedian Diane Olsen wrote a series of short sketches satirizing and lampooning contemporary Newfoundland called Cod on a Stick. It would become one of the most influential comedy shows in Canadian history as they introduced the iconic Mary Walsh and Kathy Jones to the world. They would go on to be part of the original cast of This Hour Has 22 Minutes, and before long, the Wonderful Grand Band became the most popular program in the province, with half the population of Newfoundland and Labrador tuning in to watch. Mark said, "I remember being a very young kid watching this show and thinking, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I didn't want to be Fonzie or Jack Tripper. I wanted to be Tommy Sexton. He played a teenage Catholic school student named Dickie Budgel, and he was hilarious. I idolized him." The acting bug became stronger after appearing in his first play in elementary school. He was dressed as a particular color and performed a song and dance for parents. Now, the school asked one child to give a short welcome speech at the start of the assembly, and Mark Critch shot his hand up immediately to volunteer. On the night of the performance, he wore a yellow outfit made by his mother. He stood up in front of the adults and said, "Parents, teachers, friends, and pupils." See, he accidentally said pupils as pupils. It got a laugh, and like a drug, he was hooked from the first hit. He said pupils 3 more times as the room roared with laughter. Then he joined the rest of his classmates and performed, and the sound of the applause at the end gave him a new high. And in that moment, he later said, "I knew who I was. I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. In some way, I've been chasing that exact high ever since." Growing up in Newfoundland, Mark's window to the rest of Canada was through his television thanks to CanCon, which dictates that a certain amount of broadcasting time be devoted to Canadian content. It gave us bands like April Wine and Glass Tiger and others their first major exposure on Canadian radio. On television, the show SCTV had the requirement to have 2 minutes of purely Canadian content. They thought this was insane because the entire show was filmed in Canada, starred Canadians, and was written by Canadians. But to make fun of it, it led to the creation of the Hoser brother duo of Bob and Doug McKenzie. And now, they have a statue in Edmonton. And that is the power of CanCon. So for Mark, it gave him a glimpse into the mysterious country of Canada across the water. And it gave Canadians a look on island life.
A lot of that CanCon was so important because that's what showed me what Canada was, and it kind of branded it in a way, and it showed you stories from different places. And we are so big that we do need a mirror on the other side of the place being held up so you can see what's going on there. CBC would make shows only for Newfoundland, and sometimes if they did well, they get picked up nationally. And that gave us a chance to develop talent, to encourage them to be very much Canadian and speak about local issues. And also, it showed you then when those shows did go national, you get a real look at other provinces and a better understanding of who they are and who their artists are and who their music is.
And as he watched from afar, he dove headfirst into acting opportunities. He was cast in the play Waiting for the Bus, where he played the lead as an elderly man who dies waiting, you guessed it, for a bus. After high school graduation, he continued to pursue his dream. He got the lead role in the play Tomorrow Will Be Sunday, based on the book by Harold Horwood with the same name. Mark played the protagonist, Eli Palisher, a fisherman's son living in a small Newfoundland outport. In the story, a new teacher and apostle of free love, Christopher Sims, arrives and opens Eli's mind to the world of books. At the same time, Brother John McKim arrives, a pastor of a fundamental church, and he gives Eli wisdom of a sensual kind. Major entanglements, both legal and romantic, ensue. The play was performed at the biggest theatre in the province, the Arts and Culture Centre in St. John's. Mark said, "I had a job with a professional theater company helmed by a respected and successful director. I was a real actor." He also had to stand stark naked in front of the audience at the end, night after night, much to the shock of his parents. And as Mark got used to performing in his birthday suit at around the same time, This Hour Has 22 Minutes debuted. On October 8th, 1993, 468,000 viewers tuned in, and Mark Critch was one of those watching. Mark, who had been staying in Rick Mercer's spare room while acting in a comedy group, said, "I stood up in a pub watching the debut of 22 Minutes, trying to shush the crowd around me. This was Rick on national television doing sketch comedy. I couldn't believe it. He had made it." He didn't know it then, but soon, that show would have a massive impact on his life. As Mark continued to add to his acting credits, he made his first trip to the mainland in his early 20s when he did sketch comedy at a Halifax Fringe Festival and got a rude awakening and a taste of how Canada viewed Newfoundlanders.
And I'd grown up in Canada, but I'd never been to Canada, if that makes sense, because there weren't a lot of Canadian traditions per se, and so we always felt a little bit removed. And when I was growing up, they had these things called Newfie joke books. So in Toronto, there'd be like, how many Newfies does it take to screw in a light bulb? None, because it'd screw up their employment insurance kind of thing. And so you didn't really get a sense that, you kind of got a sense you're being made fun of. And then people would always make fun of the accent and things like that.
He then returned home, and in 1995, he joined the Rising Tide Theatre. Every summer and fall since 1978, Rising Tide Theatre presents an award-winning blend of plays that reflect the history and culture of Newfoundland, performed by more than 40 of the province's most talented artists. The festival continues to run to this day. In addition to plays, the company performs the Trinity Pageant, which takes visitors on a tour through the history of the town as actors reenact famous moments. In his first year with the pageant, Mark played a pirate from the early 19th century and said, "I was, perhaps, the least intimidating pirate to ever walk the rocky coastline." Now, Trinity is about 3 hours from St. John's, but for Mark, it felt like he was on the other side of the planet some days. He said, "I felt like a fish out of water when I arrived in Trinity. Helpless, I flipped and flopped on the wharf, gasping for air and struggling to survive." But he not only survived, he prospered. 1997 was his third summer in Trinity when news came that Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, would be traveling to Newfoundland to commemorate the 500th anniversary of Jean Cabot's arrival. During the visit, Mark and the rest of the company performed for the royals. He said of the experience, "Before I came to Trinity, I had wanted to see the world. Now, it felt like because of Trinity, the world had come to me." And because of it, the rest of Canada would get to see Mark because the entire event was broadcast coast to coast on CBC's The National. The Queen met the cast after the performance as freezing rain pelted down on them, forcing her to only have a quick meet and greet. Mark wrote, in an embarrassment of Critch's, that as Her Majesty moved down the line, quick conversations became handshakes, which became nods, which became smiles. He said when she reached him, Queen Elizabeth II had the look of someone who had asked for a dessert menu and decided they didn't want dessert at all. She met his gaze once more as she drove past in her car afterwards, and he said, "I was sure I could hear the door lock. I still taste the bittersweet disappointment of this day every time I lick a stamp." The bitter taste was followed by his final goodbye to Trinity, as it proved to be his last summer at Rising Tides Theatre, because he had other lands in his horizon that he would soon conquer. By now, it was the late 1990s, and Mark began to write comedic commentaries for CBC Radio while waiting for his big break. In 1999, he was asked to host a fundraiser for the LCPU Hall, affectionately known as The Hall. It gets its name from a previous owner, the Longshoremen's Protective Union. It is home for the Resource Centre for the Arts and the heart of live theatre and culture in downtown St. John's. Thousands of internationally acclaimed actors, musicians, and dancers first got their start in the hall on their way to stardom, including the main cast of This Hour Has 22 Minutes. To raise money for renovations, the cast of the show was going to roast then Newfoundland Premier Brian Tobin. Rick Mercer couldn't make it, as rumors swirled that he would be leaving the show, so Mark stepped in. He played the straight man in a sketch and got some laughs. A year later, Mercer left the show, and Mark quickly transformed his bedroom into a TV set to record an audition. He began by stating, "Hello and welcome to this audition tape has 5 minutes. I'm not Rick Mercer." He didn't get the call from This Hour Has 22 Minutes, but he did get a call from his fellow Newfoundlander, Sean Majumder. Majumder started his entertainment career as an announcer for the YTV game show Clips, and soon was hosting the network's popular morning kids show, Brainwash. He asked Mark to meet him in Montreal to write some material for his Just for Laughs show. And while in Montreal, Mark got a call from the producers of 22 Minutes asking him to audition in person. Among those in Toronto for the auditions were Gavin Crawford, who had created the acclaimed show, The Gavin Crawford Show, and future Member of Parliament, Seamus O'Regan. Mark was asked to write a sketch from the point of view of an NDP MP from British Columbia giving his thoughts on a recent strike. 15 minutes later, he performed his material. It got good laughs and things seemed to be going well until producer Michael Donovan asked him what he would do differently on the show. Unable to think of anything, Mark said in his book An Embarrassment of Critch's that he joked he would do talking to Mexicans. As a response, Michael said, "Thanks for coming in," while looking at him the way a vegan might stare at a butcher's smock, according to Mark Critch. Absolutely sure he had blown his one chance, he returned home. But a few weeks later, it was announced that Canadian comedian Colin Mockery was going to replace Mercer. And Mark was disappointed, but he soon got a call from Mark Farrell, the showrunner of 22 Minutes at the time, who asked him to write for 2 weeks on the show. Now, this was a standard offer for new writers. If they could withstand the fast pace of the show for 2 weeks, they were good enough to join for good. Mark described the experience. The 22 Minutes offices were not what you would call flashy. The whole place seemed like a camp set up by carnies while the fair was in town for the weekend. But things got off to a good start. The first 3 sketches he wrote made the show. He later said, "That night, I lay awake in my bed. There was no time to feel smug about my success. I tossed and turned, wondering what the hell I was going to write about the next day when the whole process would begin again. It was a wasted sleepless night because Mark's pen was mighty, and the success was just beginning." His sketches kept hitting the mark, and his profile on the show was on the rise, but he was still behind the scenes. But then the day came when he was going to be on camera. Still relatively unknown, Mark was serving as essentially Colin Mockery's understudy. He said, "The audience came in and was informed that I would be filling in for Colin Mockery. I heard a sigh of disappointment." The audience may have been unhappy that day, but that changed quickly as Mark became a fan favorite. It helped that one of his first appearances was alongside the legendary Kathy Jones. In a sketch about violence among parents attending children's hockey games, they played a husband and wife. He said later, "All I had to do was hold on for the ride." That ride would continue because eventually, partly due to scheduling, Mockery left the show in 2003, and Mark slid in as his replacement. He wrote in 2020, "I've been holding on for 18 years now. I've written more of the show than anyone else in its history, and I've been a cast member longer than anyone else beside Kathy Jones. I have outlasted 4 prime ministers. I have big shoes to fill, but unlike my first day, the shoes finally fit." 22 Minutes has had an incredible staying power and completely transformed comedy in Canada. Now, many factors help make that happen, but the biggest might be where it's filmed.
I think one of the things that made it a successful thing is that it is not done in Ontario. And that is not a slam on Ontario. It is CBC execs and people want to mess around with things and stuff. They didn't mess with it too much ever because it wasn't right there. People always assume it's done in Toronto, but shot in Halifax. That was done by Newfoundlanders initially, right? So that had its own tone, I think, because a lot of TV shows are always trying to find out what they are and what they're going to be. And I think these people who started it, Rick and Kathy and Mary and Greg, they knew who they were.
The show blends comedy from across the country, which itself is a unique blend of cultures from around the world. It's a unique comedic recipe that creates some of the funniest people on the planet, and Mark has seen the impact Canada has had on comedy because of it.
A lot of Canada was, English and Scottish and Irish, and a lot of that stuff, that's where we get a lot of our humor. A lot of our sketch stuff is really based in those kind of English kind of roots. A little bit more, I think early on, we were more Monty Python than SNL in many ways. But I think that that's kind of a politeness kind of a thing. It's a more reserved, it is a more reserved culture and a country. Now we're much more open. Now we're much more diverse. But inbred in how you are expected to act in society is some of those old principles.
Since he took over from Colin Mockery on 22 Minutes 20 years ago, Mark has perfected how to tickle the funny bones of many Canadians. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. On November 17, 2004, Mark Critch was set to film a segment with Liberal MP Carolyn Parrish. Before he left, writer Jennifer Whalen gave him a doll of George W. Bush, and while filming the segment, Carol and Mark are seen stomping on the doll. They damaged the head and joke that that's where the least damage would occur. The tape was taken to the nearest CBC outlet to feed the footage to Halifax for editing. As it was going through the system, journalists saw the footage and snagged it for themselves. Mark said CBC News World showed the tape before he had even seen it, and that night pundits debated the consequences of the segment. The next day, it was the front page news across Canada. The Conservative Party in Parliament worried it would damage diplomatic relations with the United States, and as a result, Prime Minister Paul Martin removed Parrish from the Liberal Party, and she spent the rest of her time as an independent. Now, Mark called her to apologize and stressed it was never his attempt to detonate her career, but she held no hard feelings. Now, this was a domestic issue, but 3 years later, Mark nearly caused an international incident half a world away. In 2007, Russia decided that planting a flag meant ownership over a territory. It kind of sounds like that 51st state shenanigans currently going around. Now, at the time, Russia used a submarine to plant a flag under the ice in the North Pole. And as you've seen lately, we take our sovereignty very seriously. And this didn't land with Canadians. Mark thought if Russia could plant a flag in Canada, he could do the same. And with a small 22 Minutes crew, he flew to Moscow and made his way to Red Square. And as cameras rolled, he pulled out the Canadian flag on a tripod and said, "Okay, Russia, you dropped a flag at the North Pole and you've claimed it's yours." He then dropped a Canadian flag in Red Square and said, "We own Russia now, your rules." Within 60 seconds, 2 police cars showed up and Mark was taken in for questioning by police. He explained he just wanted to show love for Russia from Canada, and thankfully they told him to leave Red Square and never come back. And he's kept that promise to never return. But he stayed at 22 Minutes. Like a true anchor for an ever-changing cast, many of whom have gone on to incredible careers themselves, including 2 I already mentioned, Gavin Crawford and Sean Majumder. Whenever a new cast member joins, they help to reinvigorate the show and reach new audiences.
They kept giving it transfusions of talent and new talent coming in, and once again, we got Chris and Stacey and Abba there, and it changes a bit, but the bones of it don't change. So it's like that thing. It became a franchise. It's not just a show with a cast. It used to be a band, and now it's like this music festival, this place where people go to. And I think, being able to pivot and being of the moment helps a lot.
And that is one of the main reasons it's had such staying power in Canada. 22 Minutes has been on the air for over 30 years and continues to be relevant. Every week, something happens on the news that pushes the limits of satire and irony.
Having a place in Canada where people can go, "Oh, geez, Trump just said that about Canadians. I wonder what they're going to say on 22 Minutes about it," right? And it's kind of a bit of a kitchen table, I guess, for comedy, where you sit around the table and talk about what happened this week. And I think that's part of it too.
Recently, a sketch about Canadian snowbirds, those people who leave for the winter, was broadcast. It was done in the style of the classic Hinterland's Who's Who segment from the 1960s and 1970s. The Snowbirds segment quickly went viral as it played perfectly into the current situation with the United States.
I wrote that one. I was just looking for one more, right 3 or 4 a week. And I'll go, I'm like Snowbirds. Snowbird's a bird. You can do the Hinterland Who's Who thing. And I was like, Donald Trump bird. And I looked and there's a bird that looks like Donald Trump. And I was like, oh, it was written in 2 minutes, And it's just a Hinterland Who's Who. And it's kind of it's easy to shoot. I'll throw in a few things like that. Because the bigger sketches take a long time, but me wander around a snowbank, that doesn't take much time.
Being part of a Canadian institution like 22 Minutes has made Mark a nationally recognized name and has taken him from coast to coast. In those travels, he has met Canadians of every walk of life, and it has shaped his view of our country.
So I've had the great opportunity to go all across the country and back again, meet all kinds of folks. I like the way we represent ourselves in the world. I like that we're a good ally. I like that we care about, things like identity and the environment and things like that. So no, I would not have, I could not pick a better country to be from.
He has seen that Canada isn't one nation, but a collection of societies that work together to make something amazing. And from Newfoundland to British Columbia, each place is unique.
Whereas I think like Quebec isn't the only place that thinks of itself in a distinct way. Newfoundlanders would certainly, Newfoundland Labrador is very different than the other Atlantic province. Certainly different than PEI. PEI is like the front room of a house. Like when I was a kid, everybody had a front room you weren't allowed to go in. It was really nice and everything was perfect in it. That's what PEI feels like to me, Atlantic Canada. It's like, that's like having somebody over, put them in the PEI. And then St. John's is like a rec room or a shed. It's just kind of like more loosey-goosey kind of thing. And all provinces are like that. They're like different rooms, Vancouver's a patio.
This hour has 22 minutes is Mark's home show, but he frequents others. He was on 7 episodes of Republic of Doyle, where he played Ned Bishop from 2010 to 2014. And Republic of Doyle actually filmed in his hometown. It's set in St. John, and Alan Hocko plays private investigator Jake Doyle. Among others who appeared on the show was fellow Newfoundlander Gordon Pinsent. And in 2010, Pinsent appeared on This Hour Is 22 Minutes when then Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Danny Williams announced his retirement. Mark often impersonated the Premier and used Williams as comic fodder for the show. And when he announced his retirement, a surprising premise was born. Williams would need to get permission to retire from the Codfather, played by none other than Gordon Pinsent. Showrunner Stephen Reynolds said, "It was a brilliant sketch, and unlike most field pieces, there was a narrative. It was a scripted piece. We were going to shoot it like a drama." When the Codfather granted his approval, Mark showed up and took them both hostage, worried that Danny Williams' retirement would cause the demise of his career on 22 Minutes. Now, Mark's villainous turn was foiled by Alan Hocko as Jack Doyle, who rescues the Codfather and Williams from Mark's clutches. It turned into one of the longest sketches to air on 22 Minutes and was incredibly well received. Danny Williams loved it and said, "It was a lot of fun, it really was. You adapted things on the fly and for whatever reason, they just seemed to work." Mark and Gordon Pinsent remained friends for many years, and Mark even mentioned during our interview that the painting behind his desk was bequeathed to him by the Codfather himself following his death in February 2023, and it was given a place of honor in his office to remember the Newfoundland icon. In 2018, Mark released his first book, Son of a Critch, which recounted his early life living in Newfoundland and how it shaped him. The book immediately entered the Globe and Mail's bestseller list, remaining there for weeks. It won the Margaret and John Savage First Book Award nonfiction at the Atlantic Book Awards and was shortlisted for the prestigious Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor. 2 years later, he published his second book, An Embarrassment of Critches, which was also shortlisted for the Stephen Leacock Award. Both books were invaluable in writing this episode. And in 2021, Tim McAuliffe, who was a writer on This Hour Is 22 Minutes, suggested to Mark that he develop his first book into a TV series, and they shopped it to various networks before CBC picked it up in June 2021. And Son of a Critch made its debut on January 4th, 2022 on CBC and CBC Gem. It starred Benjamin Ainsworth as Mark Critch as his father Mike, Claire Rankin as his mother Mary, and legendary British actor Malcolm McDowell as Pop, Mark's grandfather. The show just finished its 4th season to great critical acclaim and has so far received 16 Canadian Screen Award nominations and won 1. The show has also allowed Mark to look back on his life.
This is now grade 11 he's in. He'll be in the upcoming season. And grade 10 and 11 were ones that I had friends with video cameras and stuff. So a lot of it is there. So I've been looking through some old stuff that just preparing what 13 memories are to make out that arc of the year. So that's been really exciting because it's neat to dive back in.
Through it all, Mark continues to shine on 22 Minutes, where the current news cycle has made it clear that Canada isn't afraid to get a bit rough when it needs to.
I think Canada's a nice neighbor who could sometimes it gets a bit rowdy when they're having a few drinks.
Now, Robin Williams once said that Canada was like a nice apartment above a meth lab. And while sometimes that assessment may seem accurate, Mark says he sees a new generation of Canadians out there, ones that feel proud to be Canadian.
Then people of my generation probably weren't that overly jacked up about, I'm Canadian. You're like, oh, I'm Canadian. But I think young people now will have a real sense of pride and a real sense of knowing who they are. They're very proudly Canadian, and they might be more willing to protect that. And I hope they see how important it is. So I'm excited about the next generation coming up that is coming up in this very proud Canada.
I would like to thank Mark Critch for sharing his time with me. In 2 weeks, we will be back with another episode of Canadian History X Biography.
I also find that working in Canada, you work with the best people. Like if you can do a production with a Canadian crew, you are going to get the best people because it is so hard to make it in Canadian entertainment. If you are a camera op, if you are a writer, if you are an assistant director, you are the best. Not just in Canada, you're one of the best certainly in the world because there are so few opportunities to make it in this country. If you're still working in this business, you got to be incredible. And I think that's why I have often been disappointed working in America with the quality and the talent level of the behind the scenes crew because there are so many jobs. Anybody can do it. In Canada, unfortunately, there is so little work that if you are working in this business, you are fucking good.
I will be talking to actor, writer, and comedian Jesse Cruikshank. This episode was written by myself, Craig Baird, and my executive producer, Dila Velasquez. Audio production by Rosalind Kufor and Rob Johnston. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review. And I love hearing from you. And if you have a show topic you want me to cover, you can email me at craig@canadaehx.com. You can also visit my website, as well as my social media. I will include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this was Canadian History X.